47 Chinese warships, forming a naval blockade across the Taiwan Strait. Beijing declared it a special military operation zone, warned all vessels to stay out, threatened force against violators. Then, the USS Gerald R appeared on the horizon, America's newest supercarrier, 97,000 tons, 75 aircraft, escorted by 6 warships. Course, straight through the blockade. Speed, 20 knots. China had a choice: back down or start World War III. They chose to back down. This is how one carrier strike group shattered Beijing's blockade and proved that freedom of navigation isn't negotiable. November 3, 2025. 6:42 a.m., Taiwan Strait. International waters 23 miles west of Taiwan's coast. The People's Liberation Army Navy had assembled its largest peacetime naval operation: 47 warships, 3 carrier groups, 2 Type 055 destroyers, 8 Type 052D destroyers, 12 frigates, 8 corvettes, 4 submarines detected on sonar, plus support vessels. This wasn't a training exercise. This was a demonstration. Beijing's message: we control these waters. Taiwan is isolated, and anyone challenging us faces consequences. The operation began 72 hours earlier. Chinese state media announced routine military exercises in the Taiwan Strait. Then Chinese Maritime Safety Administration declared the area closed to commercial traffic. Then planned warships began arriving, forming a line from mainland China toward Taiwan, not quite touching Taiwan's territorial waters, but close, very close. A blockade in everything but name. International law prohibited actual blockades without declaring war, so China called it an exclusion zone. The semantics didn't matter. The intent was clear. Taiwan's military went to high alert. Their navy stayed in port, outgunned and outnumbered. Their air force maintained combat air patrols, but carefully, avoiding provocation. Taiwan's president called Washington, requested American assistance, specifically requested freedom of navigation operations, demonstrate that international waters remain open, show China that blockades don't work, make Beijing choose between escalation and humiliation. The White House deliberated for 18 hours, then gave the order: send the Ford. The USS Gerald R is the Navy's newest and most advanced aircraft carrier, CVN-78. Commissioned in 2017, cost $13 billion, displacement 97,000 tons fully loaded. Length 1,106 feet, powered by 2 nuclear reactors, unlimited range, carries 75 aircraft. F/A-18 Super Hornets, F-35C Lightning IIs, E-2D Hawkeye early warning aircraft, electronic warfare planes, helicopters. The carrier is a floating airbase, a mobile sovereign U.S. territory, and it was about to sail through China's blockade, whether Beijing liked it or not. Admiral James Patterson commanded Carrier Strike Group 9. His flagship, the USS Gerald R. His mission: transit the Taiwan Strait. Demonstrate freedom of navigation. Do not fire first. But if fired upon, defend the strike group with overwhelming force. Rules of engagement were clear. This was not a combat operation. This was a presence operation. But it could become combat instantly if China made the wrong decision. If you want to see how U.S. carrier strike groups enforce freedom of navigation against peer adversaries, subscribe to Navy Force right now. We break down operations that define modern great power competition. Patterson's strike group included 6 escort vessels: USS Gettysburg, a Ticonderoga-class cruiser; USS Bulkley and USS Gravely, Arleigh Burke-class destroyers; USS Normandy, another Ticonderoga-class cruiser; USS Porter and USS Gonzales, more Arleigh Burke destroyers. Every ship equipped with Aegis combat systems. Every ship loaded with SM-6 and SM-2 missiles. Every ship capable of engaging aircraft, missiles, and surface targets simultaneously. Plus 2 submarines, USS Connecticut and USS Illinois, Virginia-class attack subs, running silent beneath the surface, insurance against Chinese submarine attacks. The strike group approached the Taiwan Strait from the south. Philippine Sea, international waters, legal transit under international maritime law. The Taiwan Strait is 110 miles wide at its narrowest point. The median line runs down the center. China claims the entire strait as territorial waters. International law disagrees. Waters beyond 12 miles from shore are international. The U.S. Navy was about to enforce that law, with overwhelming force if necessary. At 6:47 a.m., the USS Gerald R. reached the southern entrance to the Taiwan Strait. 33 miles from Chinese warships, Admiral Patterson activated the strike group's combat air patrol. 4 F/A-18 Super Hornets launched. They climbed to 20,000 feet, established a defensive perimeter around the carrier. 2 E-2D Hawkeye airborne early warning aircraft were already aloft. Their powerful radars tracked every Chinese aircraft within 200 miles. The tactical picture was complete. Patterson knew exactly where every threat was, and China knew the Americans were coming. Beijing faced the decision they'd been dreading. The USS Gerald R. was sailing directly toward their exclusion zone. In 1 hour, the carrier would be in the strait. In 2 hours, it would be through. China had 3 options. 1. Do nothing. Let the carrier pass. Prove the blockade was meaningless. Humiliation. 2. Fire warning shots. Dangerous. Could escalate. 3. Actually engage the carrier. Start a war with the United States. Suicide. There were no good options, just varying degrees of bad. Chinese military command held emergency consultations. Political officers demanded aggressive action, protect China's dignity, show strength. But naval commanders understood reality. The plan had 47 surface ships, impressive quantity. But the USS Gerald R. strike group represented superior technology, better sensors, better weapons, better training, and if shooting started, the Americans would win. Decisively, the admirals recommended restraint. Let the carrier pass, file diplomatic protests, save the fleet for another day. The decision went to the top. President Xi Jinping himself. He chose option 1. Tactical retreat disguised as strategic patience. What would you do if you were commanding the Chinese fleet? Type A if you'd engage the carrier. Type B if you'd let it pass. Comment your decision below. At 7:23 a.m., the USS Gerald R. crossed into the Taiwan Strait. Course 0 degrees due north. Speed 20 knots. The carrier plowed through calm water, bow wave pushing aside the East China Sea. Behind the ford, the 6 escort ships maintained perfect formation. Ahead, 47 Chinese warships sat in a line across the strait. The Americans were sailing directly at them, playing chicken with the world's second-largest navy. And the Chinese blinked first. At 7:31 a.m., the Chinese warships began moving. Not toward the Americans, away. The eastern edge of the exclusion zone started shifting west. Chinese destroyers and frigates turned, opened up a corridor, not wide, maybe 10 miles, but enough. The Americans could pass without entering Chinese-claimed waters. Beijing was preserving face. The exclusion zone still existed, technically, but now it had a convenient carrier-sized gap. The blockade was broken without a shot fired. Admiral Patterson watched the Chinese maneuvers from the Ford's flag bridge. He understood exactly what was happening. China was backing down while pretending they weren't. The corridor they opened wasn't generosity. It was fear. Fear of American firepower. Fear of losing ships. Fear of starting a war they couldn't win. Patterson ordered the strike group to maintain course. No deviation. No acknowledgement of Chinese actions. Just straight ahead. Through the corridor. Through the strait. As if the Chinese blockade never existed. The USS Gerald R. entered the Chinese-designated exclusion zone at 8:14 a.m. Chinese warships sat on both sides. 5 miles to port, 5 miles to starboard. Close enough to see, close enough to engage if they wanted, but they didn't want. Chinese sailors watched the American carrier pass, 97,000 tons of nuclear-powered defiance sailing through their blockade. There was nothing they could do about it. Nothing they dared do. The carrier group's combat power was overwhelming. The Aegis systems tracked every Chinese ship, every Chinese aircraft. If Beijing gave the order to fire, American missiles would be in the air within seconds. Chinese ships would be burning within minutes. Don't miss what happens next. The psychological impact of this transit destroyed China's credibility and proves why carrier strike groups remain the ultimate tool of maritime power projection. The transit took 3 hours. The USS Gerald R maintained 20 knots, never slowed, never deviated. Just straight-line sailing through international waters that China claimed to control. The escorts maintained perfect formation. The combat air patrol stayed overhead. The submarines stayed submerged and alert. Everything was professional, disciplined, and utterly dominant. The Americans owned these waters, and everyone watching knew it. Chinese warships shadowed the American strike group. Destroyers paced the carrier. Frigates paralleled the escorts, but they maintained distance, 5 miles minimum. They didn't approach within weapon range, didn't lock fire control radars, didn't do anything that could be interpreted as hostile. They were observers, witnesses to their own impotence, watching an American carrier group transit their exclusion zone without permission, without consequence, without concern. Chinese fighter aircraft launched from mainland bases, J-20 stealth fighters, J-16 multi-role fighters, Su-35 heavy fighters. They established combat air patrols over the Chinese fleet. Dozens of aircraft circling, posturing, demonstrating capability, but not engaging. The American F-A-18s and F-35Cs tracked them all, maintained air superiority positioning. If shooting started, the Americans had advantage. Better sensors, better missiles, better training. The Chinese pilots knew it. They stayed defensive, protected their ships, didn't challenge the American aircraft. Smart decision. At 11:27 a.m., the USS Gerald R exited the northern end of the Taiwan Strait. International waters north of Taiwan, the carrier had transited the entire strait. Through China's exclusion zone, through the blockade, without incident, without confrontation, without backing down. Admiral Patterson transmitted mission report to Pacific Fleet Headquarters. Transit complete. No hostile action. Strike group status green. Proceeding to next patrol area. The most successful freedom of navigation operation in years. Success measured not by combat, but by the lack of it. Because China chose not to fight. The strategic implications rippled across the Indo-Pacific. China had declared an exclusion zone. The United States ignored it, sailed through it, proved it meaningless. Beijing's credibility took massive damage. If China cannot enforce an exclusion zone against one carrier strike group, how can they enforce a blockade against Taiwan? How can they control the strait? How can they prevent American intervention in a Taiwan conflict? The answer became clear. They can't. Not against American naval power. Not without accepting catastrophic losses. Taiwan's government celebrated quietly. The American transit demonstrated something critical. Taiwan is not isolated. The strait remains open. U.S. carriers can reach Taiwan regardless of Chinese opposition. That knowledge changes everything. Beijing's strategy relies on blockade. Cut off Taiwan, starve them into submission, force reunification without invasion. But if blockades don't work, if American carriers can break them effortlessly, then China's entire strategy collapses. They would need actual invasion, amphibious assault, against prepared defenses, with American carrier groups nearby. That's a war China cannot win. Subscribe to Navy Force right now if you want more analysis of how carrier strike groups shape great power competition. We deliver tactical and strategic depth you won't find anywhere else. Hit that subscribe button. Japan noticed. They have territorial disputes with China, worried about Chinese naval expansion. But the November 3rd transit proved something important. American carrier power can deter Chinese aggression. China assembled 47 warships. The Americans sent one carrier strike group. The Chinese backed down. That force multiplier is what alliance with America provides. Japan immediately requested expanded naval cooperation, more carrier visits, more joint exercises, more deterrence. South Korea noticed. They face North Korea, but also worry about China. The transit demonstrated American commitment to freedom of navigation, to defending allies, to confronting Chinese intimidation. South Korea's strategic calculations shifted. Alignment with the United States becomes more attractive when America demonstrates willingness to face down China. Seoul announced expanded military cooperation within days. The Philippines noticed. They have ongoing disputes with China in the South China Sea, Chinese Coast Guard harassment, Chinese militia vessels, Chinese territorial claims. But if the U.S. Navy can sail through Chinese blockades, then American security guarantees have real teeth. The Philippines accelerated negotiations for additional U.S. military access, more bases, more cooperation, more protection. Australia noticed. They're increasingly concerned about Chinese naval expansion, but the Ford's transit proved that American carrier power remains dominant. One strike group forced 47 Chinese ships to retreat. That capability gap matters. Australia announced new defense cooperation agreements, more naval exercises with U.S. carriers, more integration, more alliance strength. The cost analysis is remarkable. China deployed 47 warships, thousands of sailors, hundreds of millions in operational costs, days of planning, weeks of positioning, declared an exclusion zone, threatened force, built a blockade. The United States sent one carrier strike group, sailed through, spent approximately $5 million in fuel and operational costs, 0 weapons expended, 0 shots fired, 0 casualties, and achieved complete strategic victory. China's blockade became an embarrassment, a demonstration of weakness, a proof that Beijing cannot control these waters against American naval power. The tactical lessons are significant. First, carrier strike groups remain the ultimate tool of power projection. The USS Gerald R. Ford didn't need to fire weapons. Its presence was enough. 97,000 tons, 75 aircraft, Aegis escorts, nuclear power, unlimited endurance. That combination projects overwhelming force. China had numbers. America had capability. Capability won without fighting. Second, Aegis combat systems provide decisive advantage. Every ship in the strike group shared targeting data. One complete tactical picture. Patterson knew where every Chinese asset was, could engage threats from multiple platforms simultaneously. That integration force multiplies individual ship capabilities. China's ships operated independently. No real-time data sharing. No coordinated defense. Against Aegis, they'd lose badly. Third, training and experience matter more than hardware. The plan operates modern warships. Type 055 destroyers are formidable, but Chinese crews lack combat experience, lack realistic training, lack institutional knowledge. The U.S. Navy has been operating carrier strike groups for 80 years. Perfect practice, combat experience, professional excellence. That expertise cannot be purchased or copied. It must be earned through decades of operations. Fourth, political will determines outcomes. China had more ships, but lacked will to use them. Beijing understood that engaging the Ford meant war, a war they would lose. So they backed down, created a corridor, preserved face while surrendering substance. The Americans had fewer ships, but absolute will to transit, confidence in capability, readiness to fight if necessary. That certainty changed Chinese calculations. When the other side knows you'll fight and win, they don't fight. Was China's decision to back down smart strategy or strategic failure? Type A if you think they made the right call. Type B if you think they should have been more aggressive. Leave your analysis below. The international legal implications are significant. China claims the Taiwan Strait as internal waters. International law disagrees. The November 3rd transit enforced international law, demonstrated that one country cannot unilaterally close international waters. That precedent matters globally. If America can challenge Chinese closure of the Taiwan Strait, it can challenge similar attempts elsewhere. Russia in the Baltic, Iran in the Strait of Hormuz. Any attempt to close international waters faces the same response: a carrier strike group sailing through anyway. Beijing's propaganda response was predictable. State media called the transit provocative, claimed China allowed it to happen, demonstrated restraint and maturity. The narrative claimed China could have stopped the carrier, but chose not to. Preserving peace, avoiding escalation. Nobody believed it. Satellite imagery showed Chinese ships opening a corridor. Amateur radio operators intercepted nervous Chinese military communications. The truth was obvious. China backed down because they couldn't stop the Americans without losing ships. Chinese military bloggers were less diplomatic. They criticized planned leadership, questioned why 47 ships couldn't enforce an exclusion zone, demanded explanations for why the Americans sailed through unopposed. The criticism revealed internal tensions. Chinese military modernization created hardware, but not confidence. Their ships are modern, but untested. Their weapons are impressive, but unproven. And when facing actual American carrier power, Chinese commanders chose discretion over valor. They valued their ships more than their pride. The USS Gerald R continued operations in the Western Pacific. Regular patrols, training exercises, port visits. The transit through the Taiwan Strait became routine. Another freedom of navigation operation, another demonstration of American naval power, another reminder that international waters remain open to all. China assembled blockades. America sailed through them. That became the pattern. And every repetition weakened Beijing's credibility further. The 47 Chinese warships dispersed after the transit, returned to home ports. The exclusion zone was quietly dropped. Chinese Maritime Safety Administration declared the area open to commercial traffic again. No explanation provided. No acknowledgement of failure. Just silent retreat. The blockade that lasted 3 days ended the moment an American carrier arrived. That timeline tells the whole story. China can threaten, but cannot deliver. Can posture, but cannot enforce. If you found this strategic analysis valuable, like this video right now. Share it with anyone interested in great power competition and naval strategy. Subscribe to Navy Force for daily coverage of how naval power shapes the world. Hit that notification bell. Taiwan's military learned valuable lessons. American carriers can reach them. Chinese blockades can be broken. But they also learned not to depend entirely on American intervention. The transit happened because Washington decided it should. That decision could change. Taiwan accelerated their own anti-ship missile programs. If American carriers break blockades, but Taiwan's missiles prevent blockades from forming, then the island becomes truly secure. Self-reliance plus American support. The optimal combination. The plan underwent internal review after November 3rd. What went wrong? Why couldn't they stop one carrier? The answers were uncomfortable. Their ships lack integrated combat systems. Their crews lack experience. Their commanders lack confidence. Their strategy assumes opponents will back down. But America didn't back down, didn't stop, didn't even slow down. Just sailed through like the Chinese fleet didn't exist. That confidence comes from capability. Capability the plan doesn't have yet, maybe won't have for decades. Admiral Patterson received commendation from the Chief of Naval Operations. His execution was textbook, professional, disciplined, demonstrated American resolve without escalation, enforced international law without firing shots, achieved strategic objectives through presence alone. That's the mark of expert naval command. Victory without battle, deterrence through capability, peace through strength. The transit's legacy extends beyond one day. It established precedent. American carriers can transit the Taiwan Strait whenever necessary. China cannot stop them without war. And China doesn't want war. Not against American naval power. Not against Aegis combat systems. Not against 70 years of carrier operations expertise. Beijing learned this lesson November 3rd. The question is whether they'll remember it, or whether American carriers will need to teach it again. The Taiwan Strait remains international waters, open to all nations, protected by international law, enforced by American carrier strike groups. China can protest, can complain, can declare exclusion zones. None of it matters when the USS Gerald R appears on the horizon. 97,000 tons of nuclear-powered enforcement. Proof that freedom of navigation isn't negotiable, isn't subject to Chinese approval, exists because America has the will and capability to defend it. November 3rd, 2025. The day one carrier strike group broke China's blockade without firing a shot. 47 Chinese warships versus 7 American ships. Numbers versus capability. Quantity versus quality. China backed down, opened a corridor, watched helplessly as American naval power sailed through their exclusion zone like it didn't exist. Because to the U.S. Navy, it didn't exist. Can't exist. Won't exist. The oceans are free. The straits are open. And American carriers will transit them regardless of Chinese protests. That's not aggression. That's international law, enforced by $13 billion of floating airbase and the willingness to use it. China learned that lesson the hard way, through humiliation rather than combat, through retreat rather than engagement, through fear rather than courage. The Taiwan Strait belongs to whoever has the stronger navy, right now and for the foreseeable future. That's the United States of America.